they wish. Does anyone wish now to speak? Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying that I believe that all presidents, especially a new one, are entitled to a significant amount of deference on their cabinet appointments. I think this is a tradition that's evidenced by the fact that I believe in the 240-year history of the Republic, we've only had 9 cabinet nominees that have been voted down by the full Senate. But I also want to add that given how much uncertainty currently exists regarding the future direction of our nation's foreign policy, this nomination deserved a higher level of scrutiny than tradition otherwise would indicate, and that is in the spirit in which I entered into these deliberations. As you've already said, that Mr. Tillerson testified for over 8 hours. I spent about 4 or 5 weeks prior to this hearing researching and preparing for it. I've had the opportunity to have 2 extensive conversations with him. He's also responded to over 100 written questions, and for the record, none were about horses.
Thank you for that.
But and a couple things I would say. The first is on the fundamental question of whether he's qualified to be Secretary of State. I believe that he is. He has a proven record of managing a large and complex organization, and he has extensive experience in international commerce. The one I struggled with was I strongly believe that our foreign policy is at its best and at its most effective when it's grounded in the moral principles and values at the core of our nation's birth, the defense of the God-given rights of all people to life and to liberty and to pursue happiness. And so for me, this wasn't simply a focus on Russia, which gets all the attention, although it's certainly a factor in it. My fundamental concern that I grappled with is that in the face of these calls that we have to move our foreign policy into the direction of what I believe is a sort of hyper-realism, my concern was that Mr. Tillerson would be an advocate for and would pursue a foreign policy of deal-making at the expense of traditional alliances and at the expense of the defense of human rights and of democracy. I want to say for the record that in my interactions with him and with the new administration, they exhibited a high level of professionalism and responsiveness, and I think that is important to point out. And that I was pleased on a number of fronts, both with his answers and some with his clarifications. There are other fronts, however, other questions where I remain troubled. And I found it necessary to balance the answers that I was troubled by with at least 4 separate factors. The first, of course, is this track record of leadership that I've outlined. The second was things like his support of NATO, his recognition that Russia's claims on Crimea are illegitimate, his commitment to the Asia-Pacific defense commitments that we have, his answers on Cuba, of particular concern to some of us, and his support of defensive armaments for Ukraine. I also balance it with the belief, as I've already stated, that the President deserves the chance to succeed and therefore should be given significant deference in choosing cabinet officials. And one additional point, which I think really came to light over the last 72 hours or a week for me, is the fact that given the extraordinary amount of uncertainty and anxiety that exists, both here at home and abroad, about the direction of our nation's foreign policy, I concluded that it would not be good for our country to unnecessarily delay or create unwarranted political controversy over this particular nomination. And I said this to you earlier, Mr. Chairman, and you were, I think, in agreement that as this committee moves forward with other appointments to critical posts in the Department of State, they will not be entitled nor receive from me the same level of deference that I've applied in this particular case. And so that's why on this nomination I have voted today to confirm Mr. Tillerson, and will do again in the full Senate. But as I informed him today in our conversation, I stand ready to help him succeed. I hope he does become the best Secretary of State our nation's ever had. But I also intend to hold him and more broadly the Department of State accountable on the issues that I have stated here today and that I remain concerned about. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I thank you, and I appreciated the call this morning and the thoughtfulness that went into making the decision. And I heard loud and clear that for other positions that where you feel there's maybe a lack of clarity on these issues, you might not be quite as forgiving, if you will. Yeah.